Ladies and gentlemen, when we hear the name Medusa, most of us immediately picture a monster, a terrifying figure with snakes for hair, whose gaze can turn a person to stone. She is remembered as something to be feared, something to be defeated, a creature that belongs firmly on the darker side of myth. But what if that is only part of the story? What if Medusa is not simply a monster, but a figure shaped by forces beyond her control? A figure whose origins reveal not only horror, but tragedy, transformation, and meaning, layers that continue to resonate long after the ancient world that created her has faded. To understand Medusa, we must begin with the world she comes from, the vast and intricate tradition of Greek mythology. In this world, the gods are powerful, but they are not always just. They are emotional, unpredictable, and often indifferent to the fate of mortals. They love, they desire, they punish, and above all, they transform. Transformation, in this mythological framework, is not simply a change in form. It is a statement. Humans become animals, trees, rivers, or constellations, often as a result of divine will. These transformations reflect punishment, escape, protection, or sometimes all three at once. They are rarely chosen, and they are almost always irreversible. Medusa's story is one of the most powerful expressions of this idea. She was one of the three Gorgons, alongside her sisters Stheno and Euryale, fearsome beings whose gaze could turn any living creature to stone. Their very existence blurred the boundary between life and death, between movement and stillness. And yet, Medusa was different. Unlike her sisters, she was mortal. This distinction is not a minor detail. In Greek mythology, mortality defines destiny. To be mortal is to be vulnerable, not only to death, but to change, to suffering, and to the consequences of forces far beyond one's control. In the earliest versions of the myth, Medusa is simply a monster. There is no origin story, no explanation, only a creature to be feared and ultimately defeated. But later accounts, particularly those written by the Roman poet Ovid, in his work Metamorphoses, offer a very different perspective. In these retellings, Medusa was once a woman. Not just any woman, but one of extraordinary beauty. Her beauty was so striking that it drew the attention of gods themselves, and among them was Poseidon. What followed would change her life forever. Within the sacred temple of Athena, a place of silence, order, and divine presence, Medusa sought refuge. This was not merely a structure of stone and marble, it was a sanctuary, a place where mortals came in faith, believing themselves to be protected under the watchful presence of the goddess, a place where the divine was meant to uphold order, to preserve what was sacred. And it was here that Medusa turned. Not in defiance, not in pride, but in desperation. She called out, not as a figure of beauty, nor as a future monster, but as something far more human. She called out for help. She called out for protection. She called out to Athena. In that moment, Medusa was not a myth. She was not a symbol. She was a woman standing before a force greater than herself, seeking refuge from Poseidon, whose presence carried the inevitability of the ocean, vast, overwhelming, and impossible to resist. The temple walls stood silent around her, echoing with centuries of devotion. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, and Medusa, beneath the gaze of the goddess she served, pleaded, not for power, not for beauty, but for safety, for mercy, for the right to remain untouched. She reached not with defiance, but with hope. Hope that the goddess of wisdom would see her, would hear her, would intervene. But the gods do not always answer as mortals expect. The silence that followed was not empty. It was decisive. Because in the world of Greek mythology, power does not always protect the vulnerable. Sometimes it simply chooses. And when Athena finally acted, it was not in the way Medusa had hoped. Not as a shield, but as a force of transformation. The punishment did not fall upon the god, it fell upon Medusa. Athena, in her power, chose to act, not against the divine, but against the mortal. And in that moment, Medusa was transformed. Her flowing hair became a mass of living serpents. Her beauty was twisted into something feared, and her gaze, once admired, became a curse no one could survive. Anyone who looked upon her would turn to stone. In a single act, her identity was erased. Now we must ask a difficult question. Was this punishment, or was it something else? Some interpretations suggest Athena acted out of anger, protecting the sanctity of her temple. Others argue that Medusa's transformation was, in a tragic and paradoxical way, a form of protection, a power that ensured no one could ever harm her again. But regardless of intention, the result was the same. Medusa lost everything. She lost her identity. She lost her place in the world. She lost the ability to connect with others, because from that moment on, any connection meant destruction. Imagine that existence. To live in a world where no one can look at you, where every encounter ends in silence, where your very presence turns life into stone. This is not simply exile. This is absolute isolation. And within that isolation, Medusa becomes something deeply complex. She is feared by all, but she is also trapped by the very power that defines her. Her story is not one of a monster who chooses violence. It is the story of someone for whom violence becomes unavoidable. The serpents that replace her hair are not random. Across cultures, snakes symbolize both danger and transformation, life and death, renewal and destruction. In Medusa's case, they represent permanence, a transformation that cannot be undone, a living reminder of what she has become. Her beauty has not simply been taken away, it has been reshaped into something the world cannot accept. And so she lives at the edge of the world, surrounded by statues, those who came too close, those who made the fatal mistake of looking, until inevitably, a hero arrives. That hero is Perseus. Tasked with killing Medusa, Perseus does not rely on strength alone. He uses strategy. With a reflective shield, he avoids her gaze, seeing her only through its surface. And in a single moment, he strikes. Medusa is defeated. Or at least, that is how the story is usually told. But when we look more closely, the narrative becomes more complicated. Perseus is not confronting a tyrant or a conqueror. He is sent to kill someone who lives in isolation, someone already transformed, already cast out. This does not erase his heroism, but it forces us to reconsider it. Because in Medusa's story, even the hero exists within a system where power determines fate. And yet, even in death, Medusa's story does not end. From her severed neck emerges Pegasus, a creature of beauty and freedom. From tragedy comes creation. From destruction comes something extraordinary. And even more striking, Medusa's power remains. Her head retains the ability to turn others to stone. Perseus uses it as a weapon, before eventually giving it to Athena, who places it upon her shield. And here, Medusa undergoes one final transformation. She becomes a symbol of protection. The face that once inspired fear now wards off evil. From beauty to monster. From monster to weapon. From weapon to guardian. And this is why Medusa endures. Because her story is not simple. She is not just a villain. She is not just a victim. She is something in between. A figure shaped by power, by circumstance, and by transformation. In modern times, Medusa has been reinterpreted again and again. Some see her as a symbol of injustice. Others see her as a representation of resilience. Some see her as a warning. Others as a voice. But all of these interpretations share one truth. Medusa's story is not just about fear. It is about meaning. It is about how we define monsters. And it is about what happens when someone is transformed, not by choice, but by the will of others. Ladies and gentlemen, Medusa may turn those who look upon her into stone, but her story continues to move us, and perhaps That is her greatest power of all. Thank you.